Hey everyone, it's Satvik Alawalia, your host, and welcome to the Progress Texas Happy Hour. I'm joined by Progress Texas President Ed Espinoza, Advocacy Director Diana Gomez, and Communications Director Wesley Story. This week we're going to be covering three big stories. One, everything going on with redistricting. Two, the women's marches that happened across the state this weekend. And three, our team's really special trip to DC last week to talk to federal legislators about how to protect abortion rights. But before we start, this is a happy hour. So what is everyone drinking today? I've got a nice Blue Moon Belgian wheat. Sponsorships welcome to anyone. What about you, Wesley?
So I'm going to be the odd one out this week. I'm drinking peppermint tea, which I know is non-alcoholic, so don't come for me. But I have a lot of work to get done today. And after these videos every week, I'm always super tired. So I decided not to drink today.
It's not bad. Ed?
These exhausting videos. I am once again drinking a Pearl Snap. That is what we stock in the fridge here at Progress Texas Global Headquarters. And since it was free and nearby, yeah, that's what I got.
That's actually my favorite drink, is free and nearby. I don't want to travel. I don't want to pay for it. So that's perfect. What about you, Diana?
I am back on the Truly train.
Truly a good idea.
Oh, no.
Great. That's amazing. And one thing that's been truly bringing me a lot of confusion this week, even though I read about it every single day, is redistricting. And we've talked about it before, but it's still very confusing. So Ed, you've been following this very closely. What's going on with redistricting?
So as a reminder, redistricting is when political districts are redrawn every 10 years to accommodate for shifts in population. As we all know, Texas is one of the fastest growing states in America. I believe the fastest growing state in America. And because of that, we have picked up 2 new congressional seats. In addition to those congressional seats, we also have to reapportion our state Senate and state House districts over at the state legislature, again, to accommodate for population shifts. So the maps have started to come out. We haven't done this podcast in 2 weeks. We saw some early maps back then. Now we have seen all of the initial maps, and boy, are they a sight to behold. I never knew the legislature had such artistic abilities inside of them. But whether you think you are an artist or perhaps taking a psychological examination, these patterns have something for everyone.
Including donuts, if you're into that kind of thing.
So
by the way, Ed, you have a fan on Facebook who said, Ed, I heard your comments on KERA today. You were great.
Oh, very nice. KERA, the NPR affiliate up in Dallas. We love those guys. So the donut district that Satvik talked about, which, by the way, a donut microbrew might not be a bad thing to have on the happy hour here one day. But until then, the donut district is a sight to behold. It's something I've never seen before. It is one district up in the Waco area. It's in Killeen. It is one district that is fully encompassed by another district. So you have the donut district, which I think is either HD 54 or 55. And then you have the donut hole in the middle, which is the rest of the district, which is the other district. You cannot do this at the congressional level because the Voting Rights Act doesn't allow it. You can't have, I can't remember the exact phrasing, but it has to do something with a perimeter and a border. And in this case, there are only perimeters. But at the state level, apparently you can. So this gives a whole new meaning to we've got that place surrounded when you've got a district that is completely surrounding another one. And that's just like one of so many other districts. I'll give you one other example. There's a district down in Houston, just north. It's in Harris County. It's just north of Houston. And it's kind of shaped like a boomerang, but even more dramatic. Our friends over at the Texas Signal called it the Wig District because the way it just kind of tapers around and then down to the sides. I call it the Beats by Dre District because it looks like a pair of big headphones. That's what they're drawing. How does that make any sense? How does a district in the shape of Beats by Dre, how is that communities of interest? It's not. And that's what these districts are supposed to do, is draw together communities of interest. But instead, what we're getting are communities of artistic measure by the legislature.
You can tell we don't fund our education because the art is really bad. So we should work on that.
When I was looking,
yeah.
Oh, sorry. When I was looking at that donut, I was trying to remember what I learned on the last podcast we had recorded was when you talked about cracked or packed. And I was trying to think, is this cracked or is it packed or just a donut? Yeah, because I think especially, I think the jelly part of the donut, the inside part, I believe I read is like the Black population that they just surrounded by the white mostly white population out there. But so you said it was packed.
Yeah, so they packing everybody into a condensed area is an effort to minimize their influence on the electoral process. And in doing that, they created a dense district in one area, which is now the donut hole, if you will, to the surrounding district, which is the donut district.
The donut
we can go in all sorts of directions here. Like, well, is there a bear claw district or like a French curl district? The thing is, all those would be too easy because even those are still a little bit more contiguous than a donut itself.
So Ed, we have a question from Facebook, which is, can some of these districts be challenged in court? And who takes the lead on these kind of lawsuits?
Yes, so they can be challenged in court, and they will be. I want to say that every time Texas has had a redistricting process since the Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965, that the maps have gone to court. Typically, it is brought by an entity like MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense Fund. There are other groups out there. I know that our friends, another group that we work closely with, the Lone Star Project, has been very involved in these as well. This is one of their areas of expertise. If you have not heard of Lone Star Project before, I recommend you look them up, lonestarproject.net. And they will also work with various plaintiffs, whether it's communities of color, whether it's organizations. They are typically the ones that bring these lawsuits. It's less likely an individual, like one of us or a voter. It's usually an organization on behalf of many voters.
So I know you hate it when I do this, Ed, which is why I'm going to do it. 10 years ago, I was 14. So I wasn't really paying much attention to redistricting. I had my own problems like marching band. So this whole entire process is really new to me. And one thing I saw happen, and I knew sometimes happened, is that some of the representatives have actually been pushed out of their districts. So they no longer live in the district that they're representing, specifically representatives like Aaron Zwiener and James Tallarico. And so my question for you is, how common is it for these legislators to get drawn out? And what recourse do they have? Do they just have to move in order to run again in their old district? And how many times have you seen this?
So first of all, redistricting is different at every level of government. So what we're dealing right now, when we're dealing with most of these right now, so federal level redistricting, state level redistricting, but there's also municipal level redistricting. And here's the thing, the rules are different for all of them, right? So like for Congress, you don't actually have to live in your district because it's not a qualifier that's listed in the Constitution. So if somebody at the federal level gets drawn out of their district, they can just still run, or they can move into a new one or not. I think that when Republican Pete Sessions got beat by Colin Allred up in North Dallas in 2018, he turned around and ran in that Waco seat in 2020. And I'm not even sure he lives in that Waco seat now. At the state level, you do have to live in your district, and you also do at the city level. Now, I know that the city level, they cannot factor in where you live when they're drawing those districts. At least that's not the case here in our city in Austin. At the state level, that's where it gets a little dicey, right? Like you do have to live in your district. I don't know if they're allowed to consider where an incumbent lives, but I do know that they consider where an incumbent lives when they're cutting that person out of the district. So for instance, Aaron Zwiener down in Hayes County is currently one precinct out of the district she currently represents. Let's face it, that is not an accident, right? And she has made the case that they have drawn a line through an apartment community where half of the community is in one district and half is in another. It's very confusing. So she's trying to get back in, and she should get back in. But there are other incumbents who have been able to win their districts that they have just drawn to make much more challenging districts. And I know of a number of Democrats, one in particular, who is in a more conservative district currently, who has been drawn into a more conservative district, who is considering moving into a neighboring open Democratic seat. I don't know if I'm at liberty to say, so I won't. Probably not too hard to figure it out, but they can move. So, and I believe the rule for that is for them to live in the district 12 months before the general election. So if somebody's going to move, they may have to do it pretty soon. A lot of game theory, a lot of gamesmanship that goes along in these things. But what about the voters? Maybe they'll consider the voters. It's unfortunate.
It really is. And Wesley, you're talking about being 14 and how you were in marching band. And if anyone hasn't looked at Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or the TV or the newspaper or a blog you follow, your RSS feed, your Spotify podcasts, there was a lot of marches on Saturday for the Women's March. And to talk about it, we have a very special guest. So Ed, I'm going to send you to the waiting room, to purgatory or whatever. Bye, Ed. Thank you for all your feedback and wisdom around the redistricting.
Happy drinking alone.
And I'm going to bring in our special guest, Austin Kaplan, who is a civil rights attorney. Austin, do you want to quickly introduce yourself? Tell us what you're drinking, if anything, and then talk about what you're doing on Saturday.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Hey, everybody. My name's Austin Kaplan. I'm a civil rights and employment attorney here in Austin. I spoke at the Women's March on Saturday. I represent a number of Planned Parenthood entities in one of the Texas state cases against SB 8. And most importantly, I am drinking Appleton Estate Jamaican rum from Jamaica. I think we smuggled this in. Our friends Tracy and Tyrone for Jamaican gave it to us. And I was going to bring my trusty Longhorns shot glass.
Nice.
But given the month that I just had on SB 8.
Yes. Woo!
Screw it. Forget the shot glass.
You're really raising the bar for us.
Yeah.
Look, I'm taking this happy hour very seriously. Thank you all for having me. I'm here to answer any questions anybody has about the current status of efforts against SB 8, including the incredible 113-page preliminary injunction order by Judge Robert Pittman here in the Western District of Texas, issued last night, and the appeals that came an hour after.
I can definitely start just by letting folks know a little bit about our quick voyage. It didn't feel so quick to DC last week. So like Satvik said, and like all of you know about, this past weekend, there were marches across the country. I believe over 600 of them, many in Texas, all across the state, with one of the main ones, or many of the main ones. One of them was in Austin. Another one was in DC, and Progress Texas went as a part of the Trust, Respect, Access Coalition, which is the largest coalition of abortion advocacy and reproductive health groups in the state of Texas. We're really proud to be a part of them. We went up there and had, a whole bunch of events, with them, including a press conference with U.S. congressional representatives outside of the U.S. Capitol, in support of the Women's Healthcare Protection Act. We also had members of the Trust, Respect, Access Coalition talk about their abortion stories and what's happening down here in Texas during that press conference. And then we had an amazing demonstration in front of the Supreme Court with our famous Texan boobs performance, which is the bands off our bodies. Boobs is the acronym that we call it. That I feel like y'all have seen a lot of those signs and t-shirts everywhere. We were able to perform that in front of the Supreme Court and then have a slate of amazing abortion storytellers from Texas tell their stories in front of those steps. Very powerful and amazing. I don't know if you have any more to add to that, Wesley.
Yeah, you really summarized it well, but I'll just follow up by saying, all eyes are on Texas and have been on Texas. I think this trip really just affirmed that, especially at the DC rally, in a rally for abortion justice in March. A lot of the speakers who spoke during that rally were from Texas. And so I think we really showed up. We were really repping our state well. And we didn't waste any second that we had. We were really only in DC for 3 days, and we did all of that stuff that Diana just listed. So we were there fighting for folks back home here in Texas, but also across the country, because we've already seen this ban being proposed in other states as well.
Yes, definitely. And it was really great for us to, a good number of us, including myself, in the Trust, Respect, Access Coalition, be able to perform our Bands Off Our Bodies performance protest on that stage. So that was one version of the Women's March in DC. Going back to you, Austin, I'd love to ask you more about your participation in the Women's March here in DC or in Austin, and what that was like. And if you can share maybe a little bit of what you told folks last Saturday.
Absolutely. It was incredible. That event was absolutely outstanding. We had Cecile Richards, Wendy Davis speaking. Pussy Riot, the Russian dissidents, played. Am I allowed to say that on the internet? I did.
Yeah.
You did already.
Okay.
Sure.
Kathy Valentine played. She also had been, sharing personal stories on Twitter. She's a founding member of the Go-Go's, one of the original, the breakthrough band of women rock stars who played their own instruments, wrote their own songs. She's outstanding. And all of our local politicians, I think, spoke out against the ban, including city council members up to Congress people. It was great to be a part of that event. I spoke about the legal efforts in the state case, the case in state court here, and the TLDR version for everybody here who's pretty plugged in, right, is that every time for the last 45 days, every time any set of attorneys has tried to get a ruling on the merits, to have a judge decree once and for all that this law is unconstitutional, which we believe is extremely clear, right? Up until last night, we were never able to kind of get it done because the other side has tried some clever tactics to try to hold the case up. That was the story in front of the Supreme Court. This law, justices, this law is it's very complicated. It's very novel. So don't get to the substance of it. Just spend your time, waste your time on the procedure. And so in the state case, this was the problem we ran into. We were set to have final resolution of the case next week. And unfortunately, the other side made a procedural move to move it to a different panel, stay the case, and keep it iced. The result is of these stays that the law remains in force. So last night, in a 113-page blockbuster preliminary injunction order, Judge Pittman held that the law is unconstitutional. The problem is, 1 hour later, the state, through the Attorney General, filed a notice of appeal, and then private interveners who are represented by Jonathan Mitchell, the mastermind of this law, also filed an immediate interlocutory appeal to the Fifth Circuit. And the problem with the Fifth Circuit, as everyone watching this podcast knows, is that it's a very conservative court, and they have already issued an indefinite stay with no reasoning behind it that allowed SB 8 to make it from September 1st until October 7th and beyond. So there's not a lot of confidence that the Fifth Circuit will look at this and allow the district court's opinion to continue. But we're forever optimistic, and also we're fighting this on all fronts. I counted earlier today, there's at least 6 different pieces of litigation against SB 8 in state court, federal court, in court in Illinois, federal court in Illinois. So I'm proud to be a part of that here in the state of Texas case. Which of these cases will take this up to the Supreme Court? No one can tell you. All we can do is fight this thing on every front. And so that's kind of what we're here to do. And I told Ed I would bring a prop today. So I have one with me. This is my, this is my dog-eared American legal history book. Because anybody who reads that 113-page opinion by Judge Pittman, you're going to get an amazing tour through American legal history, starting with the 1819 case of McCulloch versus Maryland. But let me give you the very basic deal here. The Constitution is the supreme law of the United States. States cannot, tongue-in-cheek or cleverly or what have you, pass laws that violate the Constitution. We all know that. We don't need the whole book. We don't need 113 pages to know that. That's what Texas did here Judge Pittman cut through the fog, called a spade, and said, you can't do it. I'm issuing an injunction. SB 8 cannot be enforced. I personally think he is right, but the issue is now up on appeal, and we'll see. So the injunction stays. The law is not enforceable today. The concern is whenever the Fifth Circuit takes it up, they might undo that immediately like they did last time. So it's frustrating. Yeah.
And I don't anticipate a lot of our audience is probably going to read through the 100 pages of that ruling, but I looked through a few pages of it, and I really appreciated, the strong language that he used. So some of what he says, a person's right under the Constitution to choose to obtain an abortion prior to fetal viability is well established. And this court will not sanction one more day of this offensive deprivation of such an important right. He was very straightforward in this ruling, and I think really called out the other side for even passing this law in the first place, which is why he refused to even consider a stay and went ahead with the injunction. So my question for you, Austin, is what does this injunction mean? There was a lot of back and forth yesterday I saw on Twitter and on social media with providers in Texas who said, we're still trying to figure out what this means for us. There are questions of whether they can even still provide abortion access. Why do those questions still exist if this ban is technically blocked?
It's a great question, and it's because of the way the law was written. Again, we are up against a very clever set of opponents. And the way they wrote the law, if ultimately an appellate court finds that any portion of the law is still valid, those providers, if they provide during the period of the injunction, could still be on the hook. In other words, for providers that do open back up, they are taking the risk of SB 8, even though a judge said that it shall not be in effect right now. And that's a big risk. So it's kind of up to the providers to decide what they feel comfortable doing. The law is pernicious. It is unprecedented. And to cite the court, Judge Pittman, it enacts a grievous wrong on the general public of Texas. So even by getting it struck preliminarily, that still only opens up so much of a window for the providers. But this is Progress Texas. We're drinking. So let me give you some positive spin from the judge, because I agree. On page 111, if you get there, of the opinion, thank you. He mentions that nothing stops the other end of the political spectrum from using similar ridiculous tactics to limit constitutional rights that the other side of the spectrum might want to limit. For example, California could turn around and pass a law making it a $10,000 civil penalty for possessing or selling an assault rifle. Vermont, with tongue-in-cheek, could pass a law making a $10,000 civil penalty for saying or writing Merry Christmas instead of Happy Holidays. And some state could pass a law, and this is near and dear to my heart, saying that each time an employer makes an employee waive their Seventh Amendment right, this one, to a jury trial by signing arbitration agreement at the start of employment, that employer could be sued for $10,000. And that would give people back their rights that they've been robbed of to a jury trial for things like sexual harassment in the workplace. So, it's kind of 6 and 1/2 dozen the other, isn't it? I mean, if this law is allowed to stand, it opens up this incredible floodgate to end around, to use the court's opinion, the Constitution. I don't think that should happen, but I guess it remains to be seen. I'll be working on this in the meanwhile.
Nice.
I mean, it's so ironic because Republicans always position themselves as like pro-Constitution, pro-America, and then they're inventing all the most pernicious ways of subverting it. Whether it's like, attacking the Capitol on January 6th or what's happening here with SB 8, it's like you can spout all this propaganda about being pro-America, but then you can't be serious if you're going to then attack the Capitol and you're going to, do all these things to abortion. It just doesn't make any sense. So hopefully, Austin, you're right. I'm going to drink to that.
Yeah, deputizing private citizens to go after constitutionally protected activity. I think that conservatives will rue the day they ever pass any of these ideas into law. But, we're early days on this. And the only sad thing is that we haven't been able to get an injunction that holds and allows us to go back to the status quo before September 1st and provide the care that people need. You know, Judge Pittman, in his opinion, on footnote 86, Leslie, if you could find it, talks about a Texas patient, and this is sad, so here we go again, but let's dive in just this one. Patient who recently learned that the fetus had an anomaly that was incompatible with life. The doctor told her there's no exception under SB 8 for those circumstances, and that her only options were to either carry to term with the fetus dying in her hands after birth, or to leave the state to get the care that she needs and that is constitutionally protected. That is terrible. That is sad. That is wrong. We all know that's wrong, and that's what this law provides. The legislature should have never done it. They should fix it in session. They can still fix it, but you know, what can I tell you? Y'all tell me.
Yeah, I think that
we'll be here fighting it. The lawyers will fight it. We will fight it all the way, everywhere we can.
And there are lots of groups here in Texas too who are going to continue to fight it, and all the folks that we traveled to DC with as well. One of those people actually being Dr. Moyetti, who testified in front of the congressional committee. And one of the things she talked about, you know, on this, the issue that you just mentioned, this isn't just a ban on reproductive health care and on abortion. It also impacts healthcare for every pregnant person. It's not just people who want to terminate pregnancies who need abortions. It's people across the spectrum. And so we're putting the health of women at risk. We're putting the health of any person who has a uterus at risk. And I think that that's a really important note for people to think about.
Absolutely. The doctors will say, look, our medical training is to provide these services. The legislature is standing in the way of a doctor using their training and providing medical services for their patients. It makes no sense. But there we are. And you know, the other frustrating thing beyond the legislature is the Attorney General is the one who fought against this law in federal court. The Attorney General should be working on child support, crime victims, consumer protection, you know, things that matter to generally the Texans. Should not be supporting an unconstitutional law in court in any way. And it's a shame that that's the case. So hopefully we have a chance to change that this coming year.
And isn't this an attorney general who has multiple indictments against him?
I gotta grab the rum again. What can I say? We could do a whole podcast on the attorney general himself, right?
For more than 6 years now.
Wow.
That'd be multiple episodes.
I think it's an open secret, and you've seen it in the primary challengers, that this attorney general in particular is not suited to hold that role and to represent all Texans. And I'm just hopeful that we are able to replace him next year with someone that has the best interest of Texas in mind, to be fair. It's not that hard to do, is it? But,
and as we know, he and other politicians have no place in deciding what Texans decide with their bodies. They have no place in our medical rooms. They have no place punishing our doctors, right? And as we all know, at the end of the day, you know, regardless of what's decided in a courtroom or not, abortion care has always been necessary. Abortions have always happened. They will continue to happen. The need for abortions will always continue. And everyone knows someone and loves someone who's had an abortion. So this impacts all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And it's nothing new. Indisputable binding precedent holds that pre-viability bans on abortion are unconstitutional. That's what Judge Pittman wrote. It's been the case since 1973. We're not treading new ground. It's the other side that's trying to claw constitutional protections to privacy back, trying to turn the clock back. And we can only hope and fight to make sure that we continue to have those protections for everybody.
And you know what? It sounds like Texans are finally, you know, coming around to this. There's a poll that we've been sharing around at Progress a lot over the past few weeks, showing that 92% of Texans are unhappy with the direction of the state. And Austin, for the viewers who are listening to us right now, or I guess the listeners who are listening to us right now, a few minutes ago, Austin held up his phone, and there was a list of priorities that Texans that our leaders, quote unquote, should be focusing on. But instead, they're attacking trans youth, they're attacking people's right to an abortion. Texans know that they're not doing the right things. And what we say over and over again is progressive values are mainstream values. But our quote unquote leaders keep ignoring that. And hopefully in 2022, the Attorney General, Lieutenant Governor, Mr. Abbott will get what's coming to them for doing all this useless extremist stuff. We get some real true leadership here in Texas.
I can only hope. You're right. Meanwhile, we'll just keep banging this thing around as much as we can and point out that there's nothing new under the sun. This kind of law has been banned since 1819. It's been banned since 1973. We can call up McCulloch versus Maryland and talk about the Jeffersonian and Hamiltonian bank decisions, but everyone knows this, right? So hopefully we will eventually get to the substance of it, get a court that will hear the substance of it, strike it down as unconstitutional, and make it clear that a law like this could never stand. That's the goal.
All cheers to that.
Hey.
A better future.
Cheers.
Cheers.
I have regrets about just straight. I should have done something. I'm supposed to go back to work, you guys.
Oh god.
So do we have to go back to
Yeah,
work too.
same.
It's dangerous. Well, Wesley, Diana, Austin, Ed, who's in the waiting room with all of his redistricting wisdom, thank you for lending your expertise. To everyone who's watching and listening, thanks for joining us. Head over to www.progresstexas.org to follow us on social media and subscribe to our email list. If you're listening to us on a podcast, subscribe on your favorite platform and leave us a review. We will see you next week. Have an awesome weekend. Bye, y'all.